What I'm about to share with you is the most traumatic event of my life, and I want to be clear that I'm writing this entirely on my own. However, I did have to ask for her permission me ex-girlfriend, whose name I'll change to Samanthato, actually send this out. Her one strict condition was that I tell the full truth about what happened, and that whoever reads it respects what I'm saying. So, I'd really appreciate it if you respect her wishes, because it would make things a lot easier for both of us if you do. With that out of the way, I guess I'll get into the story. Back in 2011, my then girlfriend, let's call her Emily, and I decided to spend a day hiking in Northern California's Skad Valley. Skad Valley is this remote area along the Cuth River, near State Route 96, surrounded by the Cuth Mountains with Devil's Peaks to the north and the Marble Mountains Wilderness to the south. It's a tiny place, home to maybe a few hundred people at most, with cabins and homes scattered among the creeks and dirt roads that wind for miles off the main tracks. Some of those roads are only accessible by dirt tracks, and a lot of the two-track trails are barely more than rough paths that vanish into the woods. One thing I wish I'd known before we got there is that Skad Valley is actually connected to a movement called the Free State of Jefferson. From what I remember, it all started when some local settlers found gold in the area, and they decided they wanted to declare their independence from California or Oregon, so they wouldn't have to pay taxes on their newfound riches. On the surface, it sounded kind of innocent, right? I mean, America was founded on the idea of no taxation without representation. But after the Civil War, the valley attracted all kinds of rebellious types, folks fixated on sticking it to the system, sometimes the wildest, unfriendliest kinds of rebels. Not just kids playing at anarchy, either. Even after the first Confederates escaped and secessionist movements faded, by the 1920s, Skad Valley was still a haven for outlaws and outsiders who kept retreating there to hide out. Emily and I got to the valley early in the afternoon. After grabbing a quick bite, we headed up into the hills, planning to follow a looping trail that would take us near Kangaroo Mountain and Red Butte before looping back down toward town. At first, everything was perfect, bright sunshine, crisp air scented with pine resin, and we were both pretty excited about trying a new hobby. It also gave us a chance to really talk, crack open and have a real conversation, because by then, we were both working full-time and juggling other commitments. Finding time just for each other was getting harder. By about 3:30 in the afternoon, we were catching our breath on a gentle slope, still having fun but definitely starting to feel it in our legs. That's when we spotted something unexpected. Smaller connecting trails branching off the main path. Sometimes we'd explore them, and sometimes we'd keep going. But in one instance, after walking maybe 100 meters, we stumbled onto this tiny, isolated log cabin tucked away in a small clearing, almost hidden by thick bushes. Man, it looked charming, almost picture-perfect, except for the fact that there was a beat-up pickup truck parked in front of it, with the driver's side door wide open. The cabin door was hanging ajar too, and as we got closer, a guy stepped out. He was of average build, probably late 30s, moving briskly. When he saw us, he waved and said, "Morning, folks. Looks like you're pretty far out there, huh?" He seemed friendly enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes kept darting over us a little too much, almost calculating. I told him we were just out on a hike, trying to keep the mood light. For a few minutes, we exchanged small talk about the weather, how nice it was, and how much we appreciated our day in the woods. Then when I was about to say, "Well, it was nice to meet you, but we're gonna head back," he suddenly asked if we wanted to come inside for coffee. We politely declined, explaining that we had a schedule to keep and didn't want to be driving home after dark. But he wasn't taking no for an answer. He started walking down the dirt path toward us, insisting, "Come on now, it's no trouble. It's not every day you meet folks out here. And you two look like you could use a break," with that familiar attempt at charm. We both refused again. Still, his persistence grew. Instead of seeming welcoming, his insistence just started feeling a little desperate. The tone in his voice shifted, and suddenly the atmosphere grew tense. I looked at Emily. She looked uneasy, and I could see the same in her eyes. Before we knew it, we started backing up slowly, hand in hand. That's when, out of nowhere, he reached behind his back and pulled out a gun. In a clipped, sharp voice, he barked, "Get inside now." We froze, caught in fear, not knowing what was coming next. When he raised the gun and aimed it at us, we both knew we didn't really have much choice. If we wanted to keep safe, we had to go along. He kept pointing the weapon as we slowly moved toward the cabin. As we neared the door, he yelled, "Hurry up, they'll be here any minute," then slammed and locked the door behind us. Emily's voice trembled as she asked who he was worried about. Who's they? But he completely ignored her, pushing us into the corner, telling us to sit on the floor. It was a foolish move, but I tried to show some courage. I raised Emily's question again and said, "Hey, she asked you something." That was a mistake. No sooner had I spoken than he spun around, rushed over to me, and slammed the handle of his gun into my face. Emily's scream was gut-wrenching, and the guy yelled at her to shut up and told us to stop asking questions. Blood ran down my cheek, burning against my skin, and Emily asked if she could help stop the bleeding. The guy responded coldly, "What's the point? We're all gonna die here soon anyway, might as well let it bleed." Emily looked terrified, trying to ignore his words, but I could tell it was getting to her. It tore me apart. He went back to peering out the window, twisting his upper body whenever we moved or spoke, as if he was trying to listen for something outside. Minutes stretched on, feeling like hours, with both of us trying to stay calm as I whispered assurances to Emily that we were going to be okay, all the while scanning the room for any chance to escape, anything that could help us fight. But there was only one door, one way in or out, and if he caught the slightest hint that I was planning to attack, I'd be dead before I even moved. Trying not to panic, I kept telling myself to stay calm, even as I felt the weight of the situation crush me. Every time he turned his gun toward us, I thought that was it, that it was the end. But surprisingly, he kept telling us to shut up, saying he couldn't think straight with our whispers. I don't remember exactly how long we sat like that, maybe an hour, maybe more, but in that time, Emily and I worked out that the man outside was probably the police, especially when we heard distant helicopter rotors. Our suspicions were confirmed when the man stiffened, looked over his shoulder out the window, and muttered, "They're here." When the helicopter blades grew louder and we started hearing approaching vehicles, he tensed up even more. He turned to us and hissed, "If they come in here, you're dead. Do whatever it takes to stop that from happening," his voice filled with panic. We definitely weren't sticking around if it came to that. Our only hope was to make a run, or if the cops came through that door, we had to be ready. Sure enough, as the helicopter hovered directly overhead, then loud commands sounded outside, and the SWAT team disembarked. The man by the window started yelling, "I've got hostages. If anyone comes closer, they're dead." Then, a voice over a loudspeaker told the man to come out with his hands up. He grabbed Emily and dragged her to the window, screaming, "Show your face. I want the cops to see it." Emily screamed and cried, and he pressed the gun to her temple, yelling he'd shoot her if the cops tried to come in. I kept telling her, "It's going to be okay, baby," desperately. The guy kept shouting he'd shoot her, and it seemed like maybe the police started backing off once they saw her. Then he started laughing, yelling stuff like, "That's right, back off, that's what I thought." He dragged Emily back to the corner I was in, then backed off quickly with the gun trained on us, yelling how he was going to use us as human shields. Suddenly the outside noise shifted again, a burst of gunfire and shouting. The man ran back to the window, firing into the woods, shots hitting the glass. After that, he turned his gun on me and barked, "Kneel in the middle of the room." Honestly, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to follow orders to kneel with my hands behind my back like some execution. I knew that if I moved wrong, I'd be dead. So I did what I could. I told Emily I loved her, and I tried to brace myself. Somehow, I managed to get from the corner to the middle before my legs gave out. Then, the man jammed the barrel of his gun against the back of my head and screamed at the door, threatening to kill us if anyone tried to enter. That was the moment it hit me. I realized the police must be closing in. I thought, this is it, my last seconds. Weird as it sounds, I remember thinking not to embarrass myself, not to pee my pants in front of Emily. So I squeezed my eyes shut, teeth clenched, as the man pushed the gun harder. Then there was a loud bang, then another shots fired, and I fell forward onto the cabin floor, certain I was dead. My ears rang, but I wasn't. It took a moment to register that I was still alive. When I finally opened my eyes, I saw the man slump onto the floor, gasping for air. The SWAT team had shot him, and I watched him breathe his last. I just stared at him, disbelieving. 1 second. He held total control over me, and the next I was witnessing his end. Someone from the team said, "You okay? Hurt?" And I think I answered, but then he tapped my shoulder like, "Hey, you hear me?" I must have been lost in shock, still watching that bloody mess, unable to really process what just happened. Miraculously, besides the cut on my face, Emily and I weren't hurt. After the team cleared the cabin, they took us into town for statements, then let us go. But I couldn't drive yet. I sat leaned over the steering wheel, comforting Emily as she sobbed, trying to process everything. We stayed together for a few years, breaking up amicably in early 2014, but we kept in touch and still talk about that day in Scad Valley every now and then. I don't really seek therapy, but Emily did, saying it's 1,000 times better talking to someone who really gets it, someone who was there, who felt it. My name's Jack. I'm from Tampa, and I recently found your Spotify podcast. I think I've got a story that might interest you and your listeners. You see, back in 2013, I read Wild by Cheryl Strayed, all about how she found her way back after her mother died, by hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. Most of the story set out there, on this challenging trail where she faced all sorts of physical and emotional hurdles, leading her to some deep realizations about herself. I remember thinking that maybe the trail somehow unlocks some ancient, collective wisdom, a way to understand what really matters in life. I was just 22 then, but the book hit me hard, more than anything else I'd ever read. I wanted that clarity too, that sense of purpose, but I thought I'd never be able to do the trail solo. That changed in 2016, when I finally caught the hiking bug and started planning my own trip along the PCT, hoping to experience some of that magic myself. Since I didn't have much time off work, I decided on a 5-night stretch near a place called Tehachapi, on the far western edge of the Mojave Desert. I chose that spot for 3 reasons. First, because I loved that part of Cheryl's story. Second, because I could drive there easily. And third, because I was honestly pretty intimidated by the idea of tackling the northern sections, especially in fall or winter. It was my first time doing anything remotely hardcore outdoors, and I heard plenty of horror stories about accidents out there, so I figured I'd start small. So I set out on my trip, heading to Tehachapi early in the morning, parked at the RV site I'd arranged, and then started my hike toward Twin Oaks. The trail was 9 miles. Man, that first day was brutal. Even in early fall, it was scorching, and I was desperate to reach Lake Isabella the next day. According to what I read, the water from the Sierra was cold enough to be pretty unpleasant at times of year, which was kind of a warning. But I was counting on cooling off that way after the first day's heat. The second day, I faced a grueling 20-mile hike from Twin Oaks to Lake Isabella, which I called my challenge day. The first day's stroll was just a warm-up, manageable, letting me get used to pacing and terrain. But the second day was where I really pushed myself, trying to channel Cheryl Strayed's toughness. Unfortunately, the trail was a nightmare, winding uphill out of a valley, brutal on my legs, which were still unaccustomed to that level of effort. The only thing that kept me going was shade and the cool of the trees as I moved through chaparral, finally reaching Lake Isabella around sunset. So exhausted I almost nodded off that night. The next morning, I woke up sore and cursing myself for having overdone it. Still, I had another 13 miles to go, on terrain that was easier, but I was so drained I questioned whether I could make it. My plan was to reach the Sugarloaf Mountain campground, which I knew had some amenities, a store, bathroom, shelter, things I'd need badly. That third day was intimidating. I had to push across open, sun-baked desert terrain, then into hilly patches where the trail was less clearly marked. At one point, I wandered off the trail to take a bathroom break, then came back, only to realize I'd ended up on a dirt road heading toward W. Ford Heights. I pulled out my map, took a breath, and decided to double-check the route before moving forward. It was dead quiet, no one in sight, until I heard this cheerful voice say, "Hi there." I jumped, startled, and looked up, seeing a small, tan man in shorts, sandals, a vest, and a bush hat. He smiled and said his name was Alan, explained he lived near the highway, and that he liked to run into hikers on his walks. Offered to walk with me back toward the trail, which I thought was nice enough. So we took our time walking and chatting. Alan told me how he thought it was cool a book had inspired me to go trekking. He reminisced about his own desire to do a cross-country trip after reading Jack Kerouac's On the Road. He also said I'd picked a good stretch of trail, a little tough but rewarding for a beginner. That moment meant a lot to me. Alan was kind and encouraging, but in the back of my mind, I can't help but remember his warning. He said the wilderness between Black Mountain and Sugarloaf was some of the wildest in America, even though lawless in practice. The state technically owns it. And he warned me about Old Ben. Alan described Old Ben as a hermit who'd been living out there forever, eccentric but harmless. Still, when he said that Ben had never hurt anyone, I immediately felt uneasy. Why bring that up? I asked Alan what he meant by eccentric. He said it was a long story, not worth explaining. He claimed I probably wouldn't even meet Ben anyway. But if I did, I should remember he was harmless. To be honest, that warning stuck with me in a weird way. I did my research and got a permit to carry a concealed firearm, a Sig Sauer P365, just in case. Alan told me I'd need it if I ran into Old Ben, and I took his advice seriously. I wasn't afraid of some lonely hermit, but I knew better than to underestimate the guy's unpredictable behavior. And after we parted ways, I kept my guard up as I continued up into the hills, always watching my back. By then, I'd seen enough signs of Sugarloaf to want to rest. I took a break, drank some water, and sent up a tiny prayer of relief just for being alive after such a tough hike. That cold water felt like pure salvation amid all the dust and sweat. That small pleasure made everything worthwhile. Then, about 50 yards off the trail through the trees, I saw him, a lone figure stepping out, dressed in camo with muddy browns and greens, long, unkempt hair, and a beard so thick it obscured most of his face. It was Old Ben. I recognized him immediately. He just stood there completely still, staring at me like a statue. I waved awkwardly. I was scared shitless, but I returned his wave, equally hesitant. He watched me for a brief moment, then lifted his own arm and mimicked my wave crudely, half-heartedly. Was he mocking me, trying to return my energy? I honestly couldn't tell. Either way, I decided to try talking to him. "Hey, Old Ben," I called out. No answer at first, then I saw him shift slightly, then shout back, "You're Old Ben, right?" in his raspy voice. The tone was strange, almost like he'd forgotten how to speak, just copying what I had said like a parrot. It sent a weird shiver down my spine. I don't know if I can fully explain it, but it was unsettling. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't come toward me, just mimicked my words and stared. When I turned to leave and said I was heading out, he followed my example, raised his arm and mimicked my "I'm going now." Then, walking away, he made this squeaky sound, almost a sound of regret or resignation. I didn't want to offend him, but I felt relieved when I kept my distance, pulled out my gun, and held it at my side, showing him I wasn't messing around. I repeated, "You need to leave," softly, and then I realized he might be sneaky. He wasn't wearing shoes, which explained his near silence as he approached. I told him again to go, then slowly placed my pistol on my lap where he could see. After mimicking my words once more, he finally turned and quietly drifted off into the woods, footsteps fading into silence. I let out the biggest breath I'd taken all trip. If Alan hadn't told me old Ben was harmless, I might have just shot him right then. That feeling that something was wrong, that instinct that said don't trust him, stayed with me. The dude could hide so quietly because he didn't wear shoes. For that night, I stayed mostly alert, knowing he was still nearby. Every so often, I'd hear the leaf crunches above once heavy breathing, then what sounded like singing a strange, creepy lullaby that he'd humming or whispering, something about walking in my sleep and dreaming of that girl. I later looked up the lyrics and they don't match any song I could find. Maybe he made it up or maybe it's lost to time. Either way, it freaked me out. That whole night, I kept trying to sleep but couldn't quite relax. Every time I'd doze off, that little voice in my head would whisper, "He's above you waiting," and I'd wake up, heart pounding. Eventually, I told myself to turn over, grip my gun tighter and rest. Still, I stayed alert, listening, expecting that if he was up in that tree, I'd hear him. Sure enough, I finally drifted off, and just before dawn, I heard the faintest sounds, a softer rustling, a tiny movement above me, like someone moving silently in the treetops. My hand shot to my gun, face tense. Whoever it was, I knew it was him. Old Ben trying not to wake me. I was furious, honestly. I yelled, "If you come near my tent, I'll shoot you," clutching the gun, feeling the adrenaline surge. He paused, then softly whispered back, "Come near." I reloaded, chambering around with a loud chunk, a clear message. I wanted to leave, to get out of there, but the idea of packing up while he sat high above, unseen but stalking me, kept me frozen. Against my better judgment, I lay back down, listening carefully, knowing that if he so much as made a sound, I'd hear it. He stayed there, quietly aloft, for what felt like forever. Then, without warning, I heard him humming again, this spooky, almost melodious drone. I'm just a sleepwalker, walking in my sleep, dreaming about that girl I'm going to keep. I shivered, heart pounding. I debated calling out or saying something, but I figured it was best to stay silent. The lyrics didn't match anything I knew. They sounded like an old, forgotten tune, maybe one he'd made up. Whatever it was, it made my skin crawl. Later in the gray dawn, I slid out of my tent, gun ready, scanning every shadow. I meticulously packed my gear, every few seconds glancing around, terrified he was still watching. That little voice talked to me again, whispering, "He's behind you, he's creeping up, he'll get you." I kept turning my head, checking behind me, every tiny noise making my pulse race. When I finally packed everything away, I didn't hide my gun anymore. I carried it openly, walking away from Sugarloaf Mountain with absolute indifference, doing that because, frankly, I wasn't going to let some lunatic stalk me anymore. In the end, I didn't get him to come after me that night. That's not what I wanted. But the feeling that I'd brushed against something I shouldn't have, some dark corner of the wilderness where strange things happen, that stayed with me. For months after, I'd see a watch or hear something about people missing out in the woods, and I'd think back to that moment on the trail, that strange slime on the watch, like a tiny, unexplained sign that maybe there are things out there that we aren't supposed to understand. Even now, every time I hike that trail again, I feel that sense of unease, like something's watching, waiting for me. And that little song, that half-whispered lullaby about walking in sleep, still echoes in my mind. I guess some mysteries are better left unexplored. Thanks for listening.